There is an anti-Uber protest taking place in France right now, and it is regarding a new Uber service referred to as UberPop. Now, it's very similar to the Uber services that we have here in the United States. If you want to hire a private driver and not a taxi driver or a cab driver, then you can do so through UberPop. Now, the conventional cabbies are very upset about this because of the fact that, well, first of all, it's competition, and they're very clear about the fact that they don't like the competition, but they also don't like the fact that these drivers are able to do what they're doing without licenses, the proper licenses that cab drivers are required to have in order to operate. Now, the protests have gotten pretty violent. They have overturned some vehicles, they have put tires on fire, they have shut down entire streets. In fact, they're making it very difficult for people to get to the airport. Courtney Love was in the area, and she was actually held hostage by some of these protesters, according to her account of what occurred. And so the question is, what is going to happen now? The French government has already declared that Uber is illegal under their law. However, Uber hasn't exhausted all of their legal strategies in order to figure out whether or not they can actually operate there. They're saying, look, we need to actually take this to court. We need to have a judge rule as to whether or not this is legal in the country. Now, in Paris, the cabbies blocked access to motorway exits, airports, and railway stations. Photos from news agencies and social media showed cars being overturned and vandalized. The drivers are opposed to UberPop because they say it will bring cutthroat competition to the market.
You know, it's funny how different Europe is than America. Like, in America, we're so docile. Like, if we do a protest, it's very calm, you know, and if anything gets out of hand, you know, like, oh, they shouted a little too loudly. Oh, my God, the thugs in the streets. Unless, of course, it's after a sporting event, in which case you're allowed to burn the whole town down, right? So now in here, they're like, oh, you're affecting my income. I'm going to burn the place down.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm not going to play around with you. I'm going to turn the car over. I'm going to set tires on fire because you don't mess with my income, and it's going to have consequences. So and it's not just France. I mean, we've seen this all over Europe. I mean, obviously in Greece and other places where things got a little out of hand for a while. But they take their protests seriously, and they think like, look, man, if it's got to get physical, it's got to get physical. Now, I don't agree with that, but it is fascinating the different cultures at play.
Absolutely. And I would argue that the reason why protests are docile here in the U.S. is because the second there is a protest, and usually it's because of people who are questioning authority, you have the propaganda machine coming out after them. I mean, the last time we had big protests in the U.S. was Occupy. And Occupy was considered, an illegitimate protest from the very beginning, based on the way people in the media were covering it. I mean, Aaron Burnett is example number one. Really? You guys are out there protesting? Really? Yeah, you're sitting in your little CNN cushy job talking shit, but what's really going on in the world right now?
Yeah, and they accuse the Occupy people of doing all these things that they didn't actually do. Right?
Exactly.
They would just sit there, right? They just occupied a park, a concrete park where they slept on the concrete for all that time in the middle of New York City and then obviously in other cities as well. Imagine if the Occupy movement had done just a little bit of what the pissed off taxi drivers in France are doing.
They would have shut it down immediately.
Oh, they would have brought in SWAT team after SWAT team. They would have brought in a tank to get rid of Occupy. If they had burned a tire, if they had overturned a car, no, it's amazing. In the land of the free here, we are protesters shackled. Our speeches in a lot of ways.
You have to get the proper permits for a protest, which
That's
is
right.
hilarious. You go to the government, it's like, hey, I would like to protest you. So can I please have permits to protest between 12 p.m. and 5 p.m. on Thursday on this sidewalk, and I won't go further than this location? I mean, it's ridiculous. Protests are supposed to be inconvenient, because if it's not inconvenient, it's not going to lead to social change. And by the way, I want to correct myself. Ferguson, of course, that was another case where we had huge protests, and immediately, oh, they're rioters, and they're violent, and they're thugs, and they immediately start attacking the protesters,
Baltimore,
and they take away from the message.
Yeah.
Baltimore, yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure Sean Hannity and others are raging about the French tonight. Okay, but when it comes to them, it's a different culture. It's a culture of to the barricades. I mean, this is not anything new in France. This has been going on for centuries in France. If you don't agree with the government, you blockade the street, right? Come on, hello, has anybody seen Les Mis? Okay. And by the way, it's not an exaggeration when we say our protesters are shackled here. At the Democratic and Republican conventions, protesters must get a permit and be significantly removed from the actual location of the convention and are oftentimes put in a steel cage. That's the liberty and freedom we have here in America.